Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. I'm Task Force Bourbon. Today we're going to be having a long conversation about finished bourbons, what they are, what are some of the major players on the market, and obviously, as you can see here before you, we're also going to do a unboxing, even if it might have been unboxed already, of Angel's Envy 2021 Cask Strength tasting, and then a blind flight of the top three port bourbons that I could get my hands on. So, like I always do, I'm going to start first with a little bit of history of Angel's Envy, and then I'll talk about finished bourbons, and then I'll talk about port a little bit, and then we'll get into the fun stuff together. So if you got Angel's Envy, you got some of the other port bourbons available, or finished bourbons, go ahead, pour you some, and we'll sip alongside. Feel free to comment, and we'll take questions as they come. So first up, we have Angel's Envy, as we can see here. Angel's Envy was co-founded in 2010 by the late Master Distiller Lincoln Henderson and his son Wes Henderson in Louisville, Kentucky. Today, Wes Henderson and his sons continue the family legacy since that father, that Master Distiller Lincoln Henderson, has passed, unfortunately. They were joined later on by Wes's son as well. So we first really started seeing Angel's Envy in about 2011. The founders of Angel's Envy, the Henderson family selects, quote, a handful of noteworthy barrels from its brick houses to put through an extended finishing process in port wine barrels from Portugal. These special barrels bring forward distinct characteristics in the whiskey, giving each expression of Angel's Envy cask strength a unique nose, palate, and finish. So each year, as most single barrels or cask strength or limited offerings are going to be a little bit different from one another. So to celebrate the anniversary of, its limited edition stuff, they offered, each year a cask strength release, which was shepherded by Lincoln originally. So Lincoln sort of got his own history. He was a master distiller at Brown-Forman. He was known to bring in major brands such as Woodford Reserve, such as Jack Daniel's Gentleman Jack, and Jack Daniel's Single Barrel program, among many others. He worked there. He was tenured there about 40 years or some odd, somewhere in between. He retired and was brought in this business, like I said earlier, by his son Wes. Lincoln Henderson, he always held on to this idea of finishing bourbons and was never really allowed to explore that idea until his son said, "Hey, you know what? Let's give it a shot." Essentially, and so they created Angel's Envy, and their core line is Angel's Envy, which is finished in port wine barrels. Again, from Portugal. But today we're going to talk a little bit about their cask strength, and we'll get into finishing in just a sec. So, as we got a quote here, putting together our annual cask strength release has become something of a tradition for our family. It's hard to believe that we've been doing it for 10 years, said Wes Henderson, co-founder and chief innovation officer of Angel's Envy. Back in 2012, our first strength release was a run of just 600 bottles available in only 2 states. So, to see fans all over the country chasing down these bottles and sharing them with their friends and family as a special way to toast over the holidays or as a gift, it's very rewarding and a reflection of how much Angel's Envy has grown over the past decade. So, this bottle retails roughly around $230 when you can get it from the distillery on their annual release date. On the secondary market, you usually see it around $360, $350. And then on the open secondary market, you see it upwards of $550 to $600. So if you can get a bottle, like I said, this is maybe box opening-ish in the sense that it's already open and I've already tried it once. I couldn't help myself. It is worth it. So we'll get to that momentarily. This year, the limited edition release was packaged in a hand-carved hardwood box with 14,760 bottles available. So they've grown since 600, thankfully. What is port, though? Before we get into anything else, really, right? So port is a sweet fortified wine from Portugal, all right, that's made from aromatic grape varieties that come from different areas. You can have tawny port, a couple different types of ports, but much like champagne, where in the sense that it has to be from a specific wine region in France, port is made from Portugal's, and apologies if I mess this up, Douro Valley. In fact, the name port comes from Porto, the coastal city along the Douro Valley. Many wines calling themselves port may come from other regions, so always check if that wine is labeled, in fact, Porto. Port is considered a dessert wine, and it's mainly consumed in during or after dessert. It's also popular on its own as a dessert. Because it's fortified, port has a higher alcohol volume content compared to the average glass of wine. It's closer to 20% ABV, alcohol by volume, versus 12%, which is considered the standard in the United States at least. So essentially the grapes are pressed to extract the juice and begin the fermentation process. If the winemaker fortifies the wine before fermentation is finished, the result is more residual sugar that creates a sweet wine. By contrast, if the winemaker adds the spirits after the fermentation process is complete, the result is a dry fortified wine with less sugars. Oftentimes, young port wines are aged in large oak barrels for about 18 months. That said, some port producers bypass the oak casks and let the wine age in the bottle. Depending on the different winemaking factors, you can end up with a sweet and complex port wine or a dry and brighter variety. So there's port, right? A sweet dessert wine, if you will, from Portugal. We'll do a quick unboxing, just to show you this, so I don't keep you in suspense, and then I'll talk about finished bourbons. But this is extremely hard wood. This isn't no cheap stuff. I love the Booker's box, for example, but that can't hold a candle to this. This thing is solid. And what's kind of neat is somewhere in here, look at that. It's magnets. So when I just kind of let it go, magnets. You can see it kind of pulling off like a little suddenly, or takes a little bit of force. So that will come into play here in a second, that image. And I'll tell you why in a moment. Because on this card, shows you a couple things, front and back. It's got here's the back. Okay, I know it's backwards words, so that's why I'm going to go ahead and read that for you guys now. So on the front, there's an appearance, nose, palate, and finish notes that they have for themselves. We're going to skip past that for the moment because we're going to go and save those for Task Force Bourbon to do. On the back, though, it does add that marking the 10th release of Cask Strength, launched in 2012 under the guidance of Lincoln Henderson, our Cask Strength Bourbon finished in port barrels has been often recognized and awarded through the years. Each year brings a slightly different taste, nose, and palate, depending on the characteristics the barrels bring forward. This year, we're excited to offer our 10th release with notes of rich crème brulee and a hint of nutty marzipan. Okay, we're going to find out if that's true in a moment. Like the bourbon itself, our commemorative wooden boxes have changed through the years. This year's engraving includes elements of previous designs, bringing them together in celebration of this milestone. In reference to our original boxes from 2012 and 2013, the Angel's Envy signature wings have returned to their prominent position on the front of the box. Pulling from our 2018 to 2020 releases, the wings are now surrounded by decorative line art to create a look we hope is worthy of your top shelf. Okay. So yeah, all that's true there. Right there. Angel's wings right on the front. Then, boom. We got Angel's Envy. Please don't drop out of the box. It doesn't look like it's really solid. Right? It's in there. Okay. Pull this guy out. Kind of goes in and then out. I'm going to go ahead and set this box aside for the moment. Wow, you can just hear kind of how heavy duty that is, right? All right, so on every Angel's Envy bottle, just about, you got wings on the back. Okay, and the front looks pretty similar to anything else you might have seen, right? Other than the placard at the bottom itself, which reads Cask Strength, 60.35 ABV or 120.7 proof, bottling year 2021. On the side, as denoted on this label here, it tells you the batch number, which is C10, and bottle number, which is 6038. It has a space for when it was uncorked on. I guess that's for me. Okay, so I'll set that here, and I'll move on to what finishing bourbon really is. So finishing bourbon is essentially taking a whiskey or bourbon, or really anything for that matter, that's aged in its primary vessel. In the case of bourbon, that's American new charred American white oak barrels, then moved into another vessel that housed a different subset of liquid beforehand. Now, notably, you can actually say finishing would include maybe double oak, right? That's a secondary barrel, right? That's a whole different section of finishing a bourbon, if you will, in the definition of the word. But when you say finishing bourbon, you refer to the latter, where it was about that secondary barrel held something that had some flavor in it, like a wine, like a port, for example. Double oak is its own thing. It's a secondary barrel finishing. You got 1910 as a prime example, really when we first started to see that from Old Forester. And then in modern times, I think it was 2012, we have Woodford Reserve really coming out. Both of those are from Brown-Forman. And coincidentally, maybe, or maybe not, Lincoln Henderson came from Brown-Forman and was one of the master distillers at the time that really helped stand up that label. So finishing is really nothing new. It's maybe more so new to bourbon, but that's been a practice that goes back to many years before, with Scotch really leading that effort. Those you typically see to be aged in port and or sherry wine barrels, and sometimes even rum barrels. But when you get to bourbon, and especially nowadays, you get bourbon that's aged in all kinds of crazy stuff, and we'll get into that in a moment. You can't talk about finishing bourbon without getting raising or ruffling a few feathers in the bourbon community, because it's a very contentious subject. So the Tax Trade Bureau, TTB, everything I'm reading today is going to be coming out of the Department of Treasury Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, the Beverage Alcohol Manual, BAM, a Practical Guide, Volume 2, TTBP 5110.7, dated April 2007. All right, so that's really the most recent BAM guide that we have for TTB rules and regulations as it pertains to bourbon and some of the bylaws. So as most of us know, bourbon whiskey, which is a legal term, here it reads, is whiskey produced not exceeding 160 degrees proof from a fermented mash of not less than 51% corn and stored at no more than 125 degrees proof in charred new oak containers, and also includes mixtures of bourbon whiskey of the same type. See Section 5.22b1i. Pursuant to Section 5.221, the word bourbon may not be used to describe any whiskey or whiskey-based distilled spirits not produced in the United States. That goes in the May 4th, 1964 United States Congress, Congressional Concurrent Resolution that reads, quote, "Bourbon whiskey is a distinctive product of the United States and is unlike other types of alcohol beverages, whether foreign or domestic." So this is, like the Bald Eagle, our spirit. Okay, if you're an American watching the video. Now, furthermore, and this is where it gets contentious, is in Chapter 7 of that BAM guide there, it provides that bourbon whiskey may not contain any amount of added coloring, flavoring, or blending materials. Right? This goes and reflects their predecessor agency, the ATF, that added coloring, flavoring, or blending materials are not customarily employed in the production of bourbon whiskey in accordance with established trade usage. Okay, if you go into that same chapter and read about what each one of those things are, so coloring, flavoring, and blending materials, right? It does not talk about finishing in a bottle, right? It talks about natural flavoring or coloring, and that goes into the why, right? Why do we care? Okay, so you got right up front, obviously, the love for bourbon as being a unadulterated spirit, and that ties back into the cult following that we in the bourbon community love, the 1897 Bottle and Bond Act, where basically that predates the FDA and ensures us consumers that we have an unadulterated spirit, essentially, right? So you have that as a backing as why do we care, right? And then adding into the discussion of whether or not artificial flavorings or colorings are good or bad for you, right? I'm on the side of I'd rather not have those in my spirit if I can so choose. Then you get in the contention of, okay, well, what if it's a natural, right? Like, let me just take raw honey I got from my backyard, if you have that, and throw it into a barrel of bourbon. Okay, do you still have the same concerns? Maybe, maybe not, right? But again, bourbon is, as it stands right now, the TTB ruling does not say that this is not a bourbon if it's finished. I will add the exception, and this is where you'll get some argument, is that around 2018 there was a proposal to come in 2019, which has not shown its self yet, but this is what it reads. TTB, this is from TTB. TTB has seen changes in the alcohol beverage industry in various formulas and believes that treating intermediate products as natural flavoring materials does not provide adequate information to consumers as required by the FAA Act. Accordingly, TTB proposes to clarify that blending components such as distilled spirits and wines together first in an intermediate product, quote, is the same components such as distilled spirits and wines together is the same components as adding the ingredients separately for purposes of determining the standard of identity of the finished product. Additionally, TTB proposes to change its policy with regard to statements of composition for specialities to require the disclosure of elements of the intermediate product, including spirits, wines, flavoring materials, or other components as part of the statement of composition. So this is really where you start to see that first term specialty spirit come about. And there was a movement at one time to label anything finished, a bourbon or anything for that matter, as a specialty spirit. Right? Again, that's not reared its head as of yet. But what bourbon distillers seem to have done is ensure that they're labeling that this is finished in some way with whatever it's finished in. Another proposal, just to add icing on the cake here from the TTB, is that only the age in the first barrel counts towards the age statement. So if it's an age-stated bourbon, it's aged 10 years and then 1 year in a port wine barrel, it's not an 11-year-old bourbon. It's a 10-year-old bourbon that's finished in port wine, if that's the situation that we see. So again, a little bit back to the why do we care. Most brands are finishing their product nowadays. However, Angel's Envy led that initiative, and they are the main staple. They are very commonly known as the leaders in the industry, and really what led to the finished movement that we see nowadays. So you can thank Angel's Envy for that. Good, bad, or indifferent, they're responsible for the modern era in bourbon of finished bourbons. From Lincoln Henderson, he says, quote, "You want to look for finished in as opposed to finished with." So that goes to that conversation of mixed versus finished in a barrel, right? The final product, as he says, may provide some similarities, but there will be a different complexity, right? And then lastly is their motto, "It isn't perfect until it's finished." While that might refer to the age and when it's ready type mantra, it's a nice play on words for a bourbon that has or a company that has its core bourbon finished in something, in this case, port wine. All right, so that was a lot, right? I apologize for all that history for those of you who know about finished bourbons, right? But really what we have in the market nowadays is something, this isn't, tried, fast, and true in the sense of this is only the case, but I generally categorize finished bourbons into one of 10 categories. Hey, Big T Bourbon, how you doing? Thanks for joining in. We're talking about finished bourbons. We're going to get to Angel's Envy review here in just a moment. I'm just capturing essentially what different categories of finished bourbons there are. Right up front, as is on the table, we have some port bourbons. We got, for instance, Angel's Envy, and here's a Thomas S. More bourbon. For example, Thomas S. More is something that's really well known for being extended finish, right? And really taking that word to the max. Most finished bourbons are a matter of months, anywhere from about 30 days to 6 to 9 months or something like that. Thomas S. More finishes their bourbons for 4 to 5 years, okay? And for those of you who are tuning in, there is they formulated, this is from Barton 1792. They had a 1792 port finished bourbon. I wrote the company. They wrote back. There are some minor differences of where it was used to be housed, but other than that, they are the same bourbon. And I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for that. You can check out some of the sites I posted that email on Bourboner, so you can go back and search for it. But that email is my possession. They claim, and I've talked to a few people. I've been to the distillery 1792. 1792 port and Thomas S. More are essentially the same bourbon, right? They just changed the name. Okay, so the next category that I would consider as a finished bourbon would be that Cabernet. You see a lot of Cabernets on the market. You got you got Thomas S. More again. Here's another offering from them. You have Jefferson, which also produces one. Bardstown Bourbon Company produces one that got a lot of love. Then the next category, you got something that does in honey finished bourbons. This is from Good Times. And then you also got companies like Belle Meade, which I unfortunately haven't had the pleasure. Nulu does a honey finished bourbon as well. Then I got another category of what I would call like other. type finished wine, other wine category, and I got like Chardonnay finish again from Thomas S. More. You have Rosé from Penelope. You have Madeira from Belle Meade again. And then you got rum. Rum's a common finish, like Breckenridge. Breckenridge has a rum cask finished bourbon. You also have one that it's technically 3 different blends, but one of those is rum. Barrel Craft Spirits Armida. This is a blend of bourbons that include pear brandy finished, rum finished, and Sicilian Amaro casks. Okay. Then the Four Gate, the Bluegrass Trilogy, 1 through 3, is another rum finish that's very, very popular in that category. Sherry and cognac, I sort of mix together. You see a lot of those together. Cigar blends are quite popular. Most notably, Joseph Magnus has one where it blends sherry, a cognac, and an Armagnac bourbon. But you have other ones that this one has sherry and a red wine and another bourbon. So it's a mixture of 3 different bourbons. Legion. Then you also got, I call brandies and liqueurs, right? So a liqueur would include an orange curacao, like Parker's Heritage Orange Curacao. All right, that's one of those. And then brandies could be a number of things: blueberry, banana, strawberry, you name it, right? Another good times one that serves this point well is chocolate strawberry. You know, it was first, as it says on the bottle, finished in strawberry brandy and bourbon cacao barrels. Okay, that's just another example there. Tequila, I don't have any of those. Few, the company Few has a tequila finished bourbon. Belle Meade does as well. Lone Rider does. And then you got some really, then you got beer barrel finish, like this Elijah Craig Little Grenade. You also have New Holland and Black Bell, again from Belle Meade. And then I think we're on the last category. I call it unique and all others category, which includes generally some of the good times stuff. But you have a company, Bluegrass Distillers, which produced a pickleback, which was finished in barrels that used to house pickle brine. And boy, oh boy, does this taste like pickles. You don't like pickles, you're not going to like this thing. But I like pickles, I like this thing. This is good. Then George Dickel produced one that was finished in Tabasco barrels. And then A. Smith Bowman produced one that was housed in coffee, or used to house coffee barrels. So you got all kinds of different stuff on the market nowadays, right? It started out with port, thanks to Angel's Envy, and it's grown to some of the things that I've just listed off now. Lots of stuff. But we're here today to talk about Angel's Envy Cask Strength. So, without further ado, let's pop this thing open. Again. So, Big T Bourbon, as I'm pouring this, I don't want to spill. and look away. It says, nothing wrong with a finished bourbon that has been finished right. Very tasty. Oh, excuse me, I just need to get some power on my laptop a moment. So while I'm getting that squared away, I'm going to go ahead and first start by, smelling this thing out, nosing it. So it is very sweet. Not a lot of creme brulee. I get some like brown sugar, not a lot of port. You do get that creme brulee that I was talking about on that card. You get a lot of brown sugars on the nose. It doesn't smell like your average bourbon, but it does smell like it has a lot of oak in it. All right, let's get into the good stuff. Well, it's definitely cask strength. I tell you that much. But it opens very sweet. You get some red grapes in there. That should be no surprise from something that was finished in wine. That creme brulee is there. And more so that like burnt, crispy layer top kind of deal as opposed to the bottom half. And again, that nose that I got with the charred oak, that's all day. But maybe that's the cask strength. We'll water it, add some drops of water in a moment and see if that is the oak or the proof. So the mid gets a little fruity. You got that complexity of fruit in there. I'm gonna get like a vanilla cherry. It's like the two are together, like a vanilla cherry. But it also has like, maybe it's an apple, like a red apple. Something more like a fresh kind of red apple, like the actual meat of the apple. But again, that oak is there. It stands throughout. It really starts to dominate. It started out kind of on the sweeter side, maybe like still oak heavy, but it's definitely like, I got some sweet flavors, but hey homie, I got a lot of oak, and I am in fact cask strength. And 120 really isn't, for somebody who enjoys cask strength bourbons and barrel strength bourbons and full proof bourbons, it isn't really the highest proof bourbon by a long shot that I've had. Let's see. Here's a few drops of water in a second. Let me just finish out this last little finish here, and then we'll do that. So I think there's something else on the mid. Okay, this is a really fun flavor. You got some toasted honey. That's exactly what that is. It's toasted honey. More creme brulee. It's still there. But the finish, it finishes, I know it said nutty marzipan. I don't know if I get the marzipan, but there's a nuttiness there. What kind of nut is that? It's not like I don't think it's a walnut. It doesn't have that sweet. I don't know if it's a pecan either. It might be pecan. But like a really sharp, nutty pecan, and not like, something that's been cooked and kind of starting to like dial down. And then that oak is still there. You get some wet leather, and unsurprisingly, you get some port. I got a good bit in here, and this has got a lot of power. It's punching, so I'm going to go ahead and just drop a whole dropper in here. All right, so we'll kind of let that sit all together. What are y'all's thoughts on finished bourbon? Do you guys like finished bourbons? Do you think they're bourbons? Do you, there's one of two camps. You're either like, finished bourbons are bourbons, or your finished bourbons are not bourbons kind of fence. But you just saw, I read the TTB regulation verbatim, and there's nothing in there that explicitly says it is not a bourbon, right? And still to this day, you've got Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey finished in port wine barrels. So aside from that, added verbiage that they have really done themselves and not been directed to say finished in, right? It's allowed. The ruling says it's allowed to have bourbon. So J. Michaela says, I'm a huge fan of finished bourbon. I like what I like. More power to you, brother. Exactly. Bourbon's meant to be drank as long as it's not sitting on a shelf. In my opinion, you're in the right. Big T bourbon on the test, once it is finished, it is no longer bourbon. However, in the real world, among real people enjoying a real drink, it is finished bourbon, and it is delicious. Again, see there, you got a little that contention already strife. I told you it's a contentious subject. And Big T Bourbon says, and I love it. All right, here we go. I added a whole dropper of water in this thing. We'll see what happens to it. No really change in nose, as you might expect. So the oak has dialed down. And I think I get a little bit of that port in there. I almost said sherry, but obviously that doesn't make sense because this is a port finished bourbon. But it's sort of like that, like the liquor high kind of the port kind of taste I'm getting in a good way. But I think I get more port, less oak. But other than that, I think most of my original notes still stand true. Yeah, more port, and that carries all the way through the finish. So, a pretty good drink. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to set this here because I've got more pour to the side. Surprise, surprise. What I got in store for us is a blind flight. 3 bourbons. I need a sip of water in a second here. But we have Angel Living Cask Strength. We have Thomas S. More, which I'll give a quick readout of Thomas S. More. So, in 1889, Thomas S. More built the facility known today as Barton 1792. Leading up to Prohibition, Moore grew his distilling company, filling hundreds of barrels of whiskey a day. Business boomed until the 18th Amendment forced the distillery to cease production in 1920. Today, this namesake line of bourbons intends to honor Moore's relentless ambition and his commitment to crafting bourbon whiskey that stands the test of time. The tall bottles feature imagery that pays homage to the legacy of Thomas S. More. Each label displays a racehorse honoring one of Moore's earliest whiskey brands, Belle of Nelson, named for the thoroughbred who won the Kentucky Oaks in 1878. Thomas S. More Port Cask Finished Bourbon is one of 3 releases in a new ultra-premium brand from Barton 1792 Distillery. Master Distiller Danny Kahn at Barton 1792 Distillery explained in an online tasting that they use their signature high rye mash bill derived from bourbon, aged in new charred oak barrels for 5 to 7 years. Then the whiskey is transferred into secondary casks for an extended finishing period that ranges for 2 to 5 additional years. A normal finishing, like we talked about before, would be measured in terms of several months. This extended cask finishing process results in elegant whiskey expressions, etc., etc. Kahn says the finishing barrels are toasted and add more baking spice and vanilla notes akin to aging. The port finish expression is the highest proof of the 3 at 96.9 proof. Okay, that's enough of Thomas S. More. With Breckenridge, this is something that comes out of Breckenridge, Colorado. So it's founded in 2008 and opened in 2010. It's a grain to grass micro distillery. Like I said, in Breckenridge, Colorado. It's situated at 9,600 feet in the middle of a world-class ski area. It's a town of more than 4,000 people, and it considers itself the world's highest distillery. Run by Brian Knoll and his wife Jordan Villa, who met when, or it's named after, it's ran by Brian Knoll and his wife Jordan Villa, who met when Villa was conducting a whiskey class in California, attended by radiologist Knoll. At the time, the distillery produces whiskey, rye, bitters, vodka, and seasonal products, but has been sourcing their bourbon from distillers produced in Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. So the Breckenridge Port Cask Finish is whiskey made from a mash bill of 56% yellow corn, 38% green rye, and 6% unmalted barley. I don't know how that's the case, but that's what it says. The same mash bill that is used for Breckenridge bourbon, and just like the bourbon, it's made from a blend of whiskeys from there at MGP, Indiana, and Kentucky. So it's aged in new oak barrels, like a standard issue stuff, for 4 to 6 months, and then before being finished for a further 4 to 6 months in 59-gallon tawny port casks from Portugal. The export casks in themselves were actually quite old, ranging in age upwards of 20 years. They are blended in 8 to 10 barrel batches, and before being bottled, the whiskey then brought to proof by using pure Rocky Mountain snowmelt from atop Mount Quandary, which has a 14,000-foot peak. In Breckenridge, we have fresh snowmelt water that's full of minerals and has its own flavor, says Brian Knoll. The pH is perfect, and the minerals add taste to our spirits, just as salt adds flavor to foods, he says. All right. Whether it's a marketing scheme or not, who cares? Angel's Envy, the leader of finished bourbons and port finished bourbons as well. We got Thomas S. More, a super extended cask finish, and then we have Breckenridge, which is more readily available than the other two, yet uses port wine barrels that were aged really long, 20 years. Okay, so kind of unique lineup. I'm going to move these to the side momentarily and pull together the blind flight. I have the card underneath. I'm not going to take a look at it. Boom. Trying to pull this aside without looking. Number 2, number 1, number 2, and then number 3. All right, time to take these lids off. Okay. So we'll start in order and then work our way around, huh? So, we have a fairly Decent nose. You still got a lot of that port. Some oak. Let me take a quick sip of water here, make sure my palate's clean. Okay, I'm ready. So you get some really nice oak on here, and you got some really sweet flavors. Take a pause there, because I think I got a nice captured memory of that. Wow. This one has some more kick to it. You know, I know I just tasted Angel Envy bourbon, but maybe that's the Angel's Envy. You know, it wouldn't be hard to tell, I guess, from 120, 96, and whatever, you know, Breckenridge might be, which is 90 proof. And then this one. Yeah, this is much lighter in proof. This has a very high rye flavor to it. So you got a lot of high rye here. Not much of the port. Actually, the most port I get is from this one. I get more port flavors here. A nice balance of the three. This one's kind of more rich. And then this one's actually more high rye. Maybe just a touch of the port. Start in order again. This one's really nicely balanced. You got some, you know, your standard issue bourbon, vanillas, and caramels. This nice, perfectly balanced port backdrop to it, but not a lot of oak. All right, let's add in the glass 2 here. Yeah, this one packs a punch. It's got some of those really rich flavors. So I think it's clear to me that these two are better than this one. But here's the debate. So with the finished bourbons, are you after, right, palate and profile wise and taste wise, after, you know, ones that are better at projecting whatever it's finished in this case port? So am I rating, or am I comparing this against which one is better if I want the port stuff? Or which one am I saying is better just holistically, in the sense that they, you know, accomplish all of being a bourbon and, you know, adding in the finished sense in a great way? Or am I on the side of I want bourbon, maybe just a splash of whatever it's finished in? If that's the case, I think this is your guy. So this one, it's like a high rye bourbon mixed with port a little bit. That's exact. I mean, I know it's a super simple explanation, but that's probably the best thing you can say about this bourbon. It's a high rye bourbon. Got your standard issue stuff of a high rye bourbon. Nothing fantastic, right? In the sense of that high rye bourbon aspect, but just a generally okay high rye bourbon. And then it's got some port background, which kind of brings that high rye down. The spices of high rye and more of just a flavor of the high rye kind of brings that down and adds in that port flavor. I'd like to see this at a higher proof. I'm going to guess this is probably the Breckenridge. And I'll probably guess that this is the Thomas More and this is probably the Angel's Envy, based on the fact that knowing what I know about Thomas More, in the sense that they extra age their finish. This has probably got more of those flavors that had time to really balance themselves out and mix themselves into the bourbon, versus the Angel's Envy, which is more of the cask strength kind of release, which speaks more to the bourbon, maybe a little bit less than the Thomas S. More, at least, of the port. Still does a fantastic job. They're neck and neck, and really depends on what you're after. So I think, you know, a very easy argument can be made for either. If I'm right. Versus this one. Shit. So, I think I'm going to say it like this. I'm going to say I like this bourbon better, but I like this port better. So if you want port, I like this one better because you're going to get more of the port flavor. It's more of a balanced thing. This one's more of like, let's dial it up to 11, guys. And it just works kind of in a better way than this one does. But this one works better than the port way. So I'm going to equal these a tie. But again, if we're talking what's a better port finished bourbon, I've got to go this guy. So I've got to go this one, and then this one, and then this one. That's it. Here's our lineup. For port finished, again, these two could tie any day of the week. And really, this one could win over this one very easily if you like, you know, maybe more of the bourbon side of the fence and maybe a little bit just like I just want some port in there. But this one's like more port heavy, and it's actually just more balanced at probably where it's at in its proof. Let's see. Thomas S. More. Second glass. Yep. Angel's Envy. No surprise. That leaves Breckenridge. If you can read that, the damn light. Breckenridge. Okay. I'm not surprised by any of these things. Not the fantastic, not a super fantastic, you know, blind flight. If you're doing a blind flight, you'd really want to stick kind of near the proof level of one another, because otherwise, you know, you get your whatever your palate prefers. Like I like barrel proof stuff. I'm probably going to lean more towards that. But in this case, that's not what happened. However, you know, these were pretty easily identifiable. But they're all fantastic bourbons in their own way. Again, you know, it's personal preference, much like anything else, and that comes back to the finished bourbon writ large. It's what you like. So, you know, I hope you liked this video, and if you did, go ahead, like, follow, and send me your comments, and I'll try to get back to you. Otherwise, cheers.